The Charles Adler Show starts now.
So I've been looking forward to this for a long, long time. Max Fawcett and I haven't shared a studio since pre-pandemic days. And I see him on all my friends' shows. I see him on Ryan Jesperson elsewhere. Of course, I'm reading him all the time, National Observer and everywhere else he appears. And he's one of my favorite Twitter characters because he likes taking on the guys who are, I guess, part of the so-called CPC base, some of whom come across as people with a vocabulary of 8, an IQ of, maybe 68, tattoo on the eye, but they're loyal. They're there. I don't know if they're writing checks. I don't know if they're getting out the Visa or MasterCard, but they're all over Twitter. And then you've got these people who impersonate them. And then, of course, you've got the bot farms that have almost no followers and get a little more rude, a little more in your face. And Max Fawcett has fun with all of them. Max, welcome back to my show, this time the podcast edition. It's great to see you.
Well, it's great to see you, and I know we talked in the past about this project and what was next for you, so I'm so glad to see it come to fruition, and I'm so glad to see it number one on the Apple Podcast News category for Canada the other day. I saw that some people were making some impolite comments about how few people were following, and it turns out most of the country is following, so it's great to see.
The guys with the tattoo on the eye.
Exactly.
Do you think they have any idea? And I'm just going to make, I think, a safe assumption that a lot of people that are listening to us, paying attention right now, are people who are all over Twitter, know exactly what we're talking about. So I'll just put it right to you on this. For those people who say, why does an intelligent guy like Max get into pissing contests with people who don't hold a candle to him? Why do you punch below your weight? I mean, I know you better than some people who are asking that question. I know you have a ball, but I want you to just give it to us in your own words. Why do you bother with them?
I mean, part of it is sport. Part of it is, it's cold in the winter and can't go outside and, play golf or anything like that. So you need a hobby. And part of it is, I think if you're a person who has information and wants to share it with people, you have an obligation to punch, maybe not down, but punch back at efforts to kind of muddy the waters, right? And so when I see people out there, whether they're from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation or from some part of the conservative orbit, just, straight up telling lies about how the carbon tax works or how climate change works or how energy policy is developed in this country, I feel a certain responsibility to set the record straight and give people a resource that they can use and share with friends and relatives and whoever else to hopefully push back a little bit against that. Because, I wish we were still in the days when the media landscape was a bit more of a neutral environment where, good information tended to make its way out there. And right now it's a bit of a bar fight all the time. And one of the things that my dad, who grew up in Prince George, taught me was, if you're in a bar fight, you got to fight. And so that's sort of my mindset, I guess.
Bar fight, right? Not barf fight.
Yeah, bar. Well, sometimes you barf, but
sometimes both. Okay, we'll get back to, not that this is all that serious, because we're not going to adopt a too sanctimonious, serious tone, because we don't want to be like those TV shows that nobody watches except a handful of people in Ottawa. We're not going to adopt that kind of tone, that's for sure. But before we get back to anything serious at all, need to ask you this: the other day, you were admonishing people who were involved, I guess, in the political system, who wanted to see themselves as responsible. And I think you were almost lecturing, just almost lecturing them, get off the Taylor Swift stuff. So give us some context here. We know that people, no matter where they are in the chattering classes or the non-chattering classes, they like to put stuff out that's going to get clicks. Some people just call it clickbait. And it's impossible to put up a photo of Taylor Swift and not have a lot of people pay attention. Fact of life. Is that what the politicians and the people who follow politicians were doing? Or is there something to the idea of discussing whether or not Taylor Swift is coming to Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was... look, I have a a quote unquote Swiftie in my house. I know how seriously these people take her attendance, and they want to follow her and see her live in person. So I get that part of it. But I mean, I really think it started with a conservative MP who put forward a motion who wanted to file a grievance because she wasn't touring in Canada. I'm sure that was aimed at sort of appealing to younger people. Politicians always want to find new ways to appeal to younger voters. Look at the NDP and their fascination with TikTok. So that's sort of par for the course in some respects. But it just feels to me lately, and then the Prime Minister piled on with his own tweet where he was sort of imitating the sort of Taylor Swift language, and I just think it's beneath them, right? I think that we have a lot of serious issues that we have to deal with as a country right now, and I had a lot of people telling me, "Oh, lighten up, don't take it so seriously," but I came into politics, 2 decades ago, believing that it was serious, believing that it was something that deserved our serious and sober attention, and so I just think there are better uses of everyone's time than trying to basically rattle your tin cup at a global superstar who makes decisions on where she tours, not on the basis of tweets from politicians. She makes those decisions based on her own schedule, what's best for her self-interest, and it just looks weak, it looks frivolous, and I just really wish that our elected officials would take their jobs a tiny bit more seriously than it seems like they do. I know that their jobs are hard. I know they work hard, but bring a different sort of attitude to the table. You look at the leader of the opposition, and he is always using these juvenile memes and YouTube videos and things like that. And I know that it's designed to appeal to a certain demographic, but again, it's beneath the office that he's trying to run for. And my critique is for all parties. They're all doing this, and I just don't think it's a good look.
So, is it a good look when someone like Danielle Smith, a premier, and the opposition leader Pierre Poilievre stand beside somebody looking like they fully endorse the somebody they're standing beside, who's wearing a T-shirt talking about straight pride? Essentially, I'm not going to repeat all the language. It is also juvenile, but it's basically an anti-LGBT shirt. I don't want to do deep penetrating analysis on the dumb message. That's what it was. You can see it from 1,000 miles away. Both of them stood beside him, and then I guess had their mediocre spinners put out the message that they didn't see the shirt. We all know that messages on T-shirts are designed to be so bold, so simple, and so easy to see that unless you're drunk as a skunk or an absolute moron, it's impossible to miss the message. Whatever I may think of Danielle Smith and Pierre Poilievre, both of whom I've known in my real life, whatever their politics are and whatever divergences there may be, I certainly don't think of them as drunken morons. So what's Maxwell Fawcett's take on what the T-shirt controversy and the LGBT controversy is all about in Alberta, and why are these two conservative Pauls so interested in, on the one hand, pandering to the anti-LGBT crowd, and on the other hand, pretending that they didn't see what they saw?
Oh, where to start there? So I used to do the job of, I think they call it basically a political body person, right? You work with the candidate, you bring them their coffee, you make sure that nobody they don't want to talk to doesn't talk to them. It's a sort of lower rung job in the political ecosystem, but it's one almost everyone does at some point. And there is no earthly way that they did not know what was on this T-shirt when this person was taking a picture with her. It's a little bit frustrating or whatever to see a bunch of people in the media, political scientists and whatnot, saying, "Oh, well, it's so strange that her staff let her down, or it's so strange that his staff didn't do their job." And it's like, no, they did their job. They wanted this to happen. This is a deliberate strategy that conservatives use to simultaneously wink to their base to let them know that, I got you. We're on the same page on this stuff. And then they go and they issue some half-hearted apology to the rest of us saying, "Oh, gee, I didn't see it. If I'd seen it, I certainly wouldn't have done it." It's we've seen this so many times already. You'd think that people would wise up to the shtick here.
With Pierre Poilievre, it was really obvious because they had him behind the hay bales, and it was just obvious that they had set it up. So you've got Pierre Poilievre meeting the guy in the shirt before they take the shot. So it's not really in doubt. I don't want to. I don't want to get into this business. I realize that a lot of people in media have the attitude that they're not supposed to challenge anybody. They're just supposed to be, I don't know, they're just supposed to take down whatever they're saying because that's objective. I mean, I find that weak, but that's what they do. So, but I don't want to pretend that the media is so stupid that they didn't know that they were being lied to. Do you object to my take on that? Do you think that there ought to be some media elders weighing in every now and then, saying that when it's obvious, when you're obviously being lied to by Danielle Smith, when you're obviously being lied to by Pierre Poilievre, you've got to say something. You've got to get in their faces. You've got to say something like, why are you insisting on telling me something that is demonstrably untrue? Is that something a media person should be saying to either the premier or the opposition leader or both?
Probably not. I mean, they have to pick their spots, especially in this landscape right now where the media is so sort of demonized by conservatives and so on their heels about the bias of their coverage. And here in Alberta, there was that big story that the CBC published around Premier Smith reaching out to prosecutors in a case with the Coutts border blockade, and then CBC had to come out and retract a part of the story. So they're really on their heels now. So I would not recommend that they, sort of pick their spot here and say, no, this is, you're obviously lying, because there's no way to know that and there's no way to prove it. I guess maybe they just sort of have to play along with the charade. But as to the charade, it's very clear that Poilievre and Smith are doing something here. I think both of them, in their personal views, if you gave them truth serum, they fully support LGBTQ rights. They're both sort of libertarian-minded people. Poilievre, in a speech in French during the last leadership sort of pre-campaign, indicated as much, that he was fully supportive of LGBTQ rights. He's never said it in English, I don't believe. He certainly never said, he's never come out forcefully and defended and validated the perspective of the LGBTQ community. So he's clearly trying to have it both ways, that people in Quebec know he thinks a certain way, but people in perhaps Alberta or the rest of Canada don't know that. I wish that he would just tell people what he actually thinks. I don't understand why you would get into politics to not tell people what you actually think. That seems incredibly dispiriting to me, but maybe I don't have the sort of Machiavellian ruthlessness that it takes to become prime minister or premier. But, they're both doing the same thing. They're disguising their own personal views and accommodating what is, a really objectionable perspective, because they need the votes. I've seen lots of people on Twitter saying, "Oh, what's the problem with straight pride? It's no different than gay pride." Give me a break. Nobody has ever been discriminated against because they're straight. No one's ever been beaten on because they're straight. Society has not said terrible things about you because you're straight. It is not even remotely equivalent. It's the exact same thing as the people who go on about, well, why can't I show white pride? It's the same as black pride. No, it's not. Again, the same thing. If you took even a cursory look at history, you would understand that these things are not neutral or equivalent. They are pernicious and kind of a code for the thing you really want to say, which is that, the LGBTQ community is bad, or that black people having pride is bad. So, I don't have any time for that nonsense. I wish that they didn't either, but as I said, they need the votes.
So I don't tend to, when people confront me with stuff like that, what's the difference between white pride and black pride and straight pride and gay pride? Like, I just don't, because I just make the assumption, and help me with this, because maybe I'm a bit of an SNOB on this, Max, but I don't believe that comments like that are coming from an honest place. I think it's an immature sort of propensity for a confrontation that is absolutely needless. And I always assume that they just want me to somehow get exercised, because that way they're, quote, owning a lib. I mean, it's like some of the T-shirt indicated that if you are born, if you exist because two straight people had sex. And I thought to myself, of all that, I sometimes talk about the guy with the low IQ and the tattoo on the eye, but I'm thinking, what could possibly be dumber than thinking that two people who are today out, one gay, one lesbian, never had sex with a member of the opposite sex? I mean, so I don't challenge it, but let me just ask you for sort of an honesty check here. Am I missing something? Do people actually believe that before people came out as I say, gay or lesbian, that when they had partners and they were involved in a heterosexual relationship, that they were celibate? I mean, what is that what they believe?
Yeah, I mean, it defies any sort of realistic appraisal of the situation. But the people who take this seriously, and I think you're correct to sort of identify that a lot of it is just trolling. It's really just to get a reaction, to piss off the people they hate. That's the game. But for anyone who actually believes that gay people have never had biological children, I mean, it's just a fundamental lack of curiosity about the world before they were born, or before 1 year ago. And there's a lot of people out there who just aren't curious. And I think you're right. You can't help people like that. There's no argument that you can put forward to them that's going to change their mind. Theirs is a commitment to not knowing stuff. And so trying to change that by helping them know things isn't going to move them. They like not knowing stuff. I mean, I think one of the challenges with social media, with the current landscape that we're in, is there's all these sort of opportunities to get into arguments with people who are there for the bad reasons. They're there to waste your time. They're there to frustrate you. They're there to own the libs. They're there for, or they're bots. They're there to like professionally waste your time. And you really got to choose your spots carefully, right? You got to find people, if you really want to engage in that sort of discourse, who are open to changing their mind. And that's not a big number. I mean, it never was a big number. It's not like social media totally invented that reality, but it's a much smaller number than it ever used to be, because we're all having these arguments in public, in full view of everybody. And to change your mind, I think, looks weak to a lot of people. And you used to be able to do it in the privacy of a in-person conversation or a classroom or whatever it might be. Now you've got potentially millions of eyeballs on you all the time. So you can't lose face by standing down. So it just leads to these sort of endlessly repetitive and pointless arguments. And I believe me, I am trying not to take that bait. I'm not succeeding as much as my wife probably would like, but every day is an opportunity to do better, and I'm trying.
All right, let's just I guess cut to the chase here on this. This is all under the rubric of culture war. Isn't it true that when you're involved in a culture war on social media, you'll get picked up by far more people and far more algorithms than when you're not involved in a culture war? In other words, you're a person who loves discussing economics. But isn't it true that if you're discussing economic issues, you won't get as much bang for your buck, as it were, as if you're talking about Taylor Swift and Danielle Smith pretending she didn't see what she saw on someone's T-shirt?
100%. We respond to the incentives that are out there for us, whether we're journalists or we're cultural entrepreneurs, and there's lots of people on social media who are social media entrepreneurs, and all of the algorithms, all of the inputs are wired in a way that rewards conflict, that rewards celebrity, that rewards amplitude. And I find that the best conversations I've had on social media are usually the ones that don't have any of that. They're curious exchanges of information or perspectives where you can disagree with somebody, you come from it from a certain place, but you can actually learn and be respectful. And the algorithm hates it. Because no one's going to quote tweet it and retweet it and go, oh my God, look at this. This is crazy. What did they do? It's just, it doesn't work for it. And I am painfully aware of the way in which social media is rewiring my brain every day. I used to be able to read long form fiction very easily. I used to love reading books, and now it's like pulling teeth, because, been on Twitter, been doing this for so long that my brain just reacts differently to that sort of stimulus now. And so we're all part of this experiment, that of course companies like Meta and Google are profiting handsomely from. But I think all we can do when we're in these spaces is just try to be aware of what the spaces are trying to do to us. They're not neutral.
So when we're talking about Facebook, when we're talking about Google, when we're talking about Twitter, help us understand, for those of us who don't understand what algorithms are. When Max Fawcett, who studies this stuff virtually 24/7 because he just doesn't have the attention span for Ulysses anymore. James Joyce is in the past. Shakespeare is in the past. Can't even watch a great 3-hour movie, especially the kind with subtitles. Can't do that anymore because your brain's been rewired. What is an algorithm, and why does an algorithm reward garbage?
I mean, in fairness, Joyce was always a slog, but yes, everything else you said there is correct. I mean, an algorithm is basically a rubric that has been programmed into a social media site that learns from your behavior and rewards and feeds what it thinks you want, right? So, with Twitter, it used to be that the thread, your feed was just who you followed, and their stuff would come up in chronological order. So if I posted a tweet on politics at 2 p.m. and then Charles Adler posted a tweet on something happening in Europe at 2:15, they would show up in that order. And what Twitter has done, Meta is entirely algorithmic at this point.
Meta, just so people understand totally.
Meta
is Facebook. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry,
that was how it rebranded itself a few years ago.
Yeah.
There's a whole other story there. But so Facebook, there's no chronological order. It shows you what the algorithm thinks you want to see, and the algorithm is, this sort of bundle of code and machine learning that tries to optimize for basically the outcomes it wants, which is you staying on the site and using it as long as possible. Therefore, they can sell more advertising, et cetera, et cetera. So the algorithm tends to serve up things like conflict, like disagreement. So, you'll see people complaining on Twitter that, why is so-and-so's tweets in my feed? I thought I blocked that person, or I thought I got rid of that. I don't follow that person. Why do I keep seeing them? It's because the algorithm thinks that you're going to react. Not necessarily react positively. You might react very negatively, but it wants a reaction. The worst thing for an algorithm is that you get bored and leave the site, right? It wants to keep you there. So the algorithms are very smart. They know what provokes conflict. They know what provokes engagement. The problem is, that the things that do that are not necessarily socially beneficial or even socially neutral. You look at YouTube, for example, and this has been well documented in conjunction with, extremists, school shootings, things like that, where if you're on YouTube and you watch a video about World War II because you're curious about it, it'll serve you up another video that pushes you in a bit of a different, further direction. Maybe you want to learn about Nazism. Oh, you watch that. Well, let's serve you something even more far right. And it pulls people into these, what are called YouTube rabbit holes, where they become radicalized by the content the algorithm serves up, because the algorithm wants to keep them on the site. And, it can be very dangerous stuff.
Now, is that what rewires your brain, Max? Is that what makes it difficult for you to read Shakespeare or anybody else that you used to read in the days before the iPhone? That because you're used to neo-Nazism coming at you, words like pedophile and groomer and all the stuff that we're seeing these days on social media that is being served up by the algorithms, is just experiencing all of that extreme nonsense. Is that what rewires your brain and lowers your attention span, takes it right down to the ankles?
I think that's what can radicalize people. I think what kills your attention span is the dopamine hit of likes and retweets and shares. Someone explained to me, that they were in the world of social media and sort of the coding and programming of it. He said, look, we design these things so they're like video games, right? There's the sounds they make, the way they reward, your likes, and you get a bunch of likes on a tweet. It feels like you've won. You've got a high score. It's all sort of this like video gamification of social interaction. And so, to go from saying a thing and then being rewarded for it to just reading a book that doesn't do anything, like the book doesn't reward you, it doesn't make sounds, it doesn't, tap you on the shoulder and say you read that page really, really well. Your brain doesn't like it, right? It's sort of like the mouse in the cage experiments, where they get a little dopamine hit from doing the right thing, and they keep doing that thing more and more. We're being sort of programmed by these algorithms and these technologies to behave the way they want us to. And look, I love books. I still have, my house is still full of books, although they're ones I used to read. Maybe I will again in the future, but they don't have that capacity. They can only reward us in making us smarter, knowing new things and all that stuff that used to be really important. And, for better or worse, definitely worse, is less relevant, I think, in this day and age.
So you've got an exercise machine behind you, and if you ever decide to sell that house, Max, I would say keep it there. People really relate to that, whether they like to get on or not. It's cool. But if you've got a room that's just a library, like a couple of hundred books, I'm not saying burn the books. I'm not a neo-Nazi. Don't burn the books. But put the book somewhere else when you're staging the house, because apparently a lot of people who are looking for homes these days, they can relate to the exercise bikes, they can relate to a lot of stuff. They cannot relate to a library. They haven't been in a library in some cases ever.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's totally the thing that marks one of the things. I mean, I also like trees and I watch birds now, so it's one of the things that marks me as an older individual. But like I just love looking at my old books because I remember reading them, and I think of them as like an insurance policy. Like if the internet falls apart, and who knows, it could fall apart tomorrow, I don't know how it works, I always have my books. I can go back to reading them, and they'll be there for me if there's if society falls apart, I got something to do. So they're a good insurance policy. But you're right. If you grow up in an age with social media, a book seems like it's sort of like a mechanical typewriter. It's like, what is that thing? What does it do? I have a 2-year-old son, and I hope he reads books, but it's going to be an uphill slog. I know that. So
Max, we're talking to you in Calgary, and you're not wearing your hat. Well, what's up with that?
Oh, I'm one of those Stampede scofflaws. I have never worn a cowboy hat, and I don't think I ever will. I was raised. My grandfather was very clear about not putting on airs and not pretending to be something you weren't. He grew up on a farm in Alberta, and he never wore a cowboy hat. So I think that just is sort of in my blood. But you'd be surprised at how many of us there are here in Calgary, and I venture out when I have to, but Stampede tends to be a good opportunity to stay inside and look at my books or maybe play some golf. But I try to steer clear of the dog and pony show.
You're not wearing a hat. You're not posing beside any people wearing weird shirts. You're not doing any of that. Help me out with this. I've lived in Calgary 3 times, so I don't want to pretend that I don't know anything about Calgary. I just had a hard time. It's not that I didn't attend a Stampede. I just had a hard time doing all the things that some people insisted on doing. Wearing the hat, wearing the shit kickers, wearing the jeans, pretending they were cowboys. I've got a lot of respect for real cowboys. I spent time with real cowboys, and I would just feel like a moron pretending that I was one of them. But I guess it's a tradition. Some people get into it, and some people do not.
Yeah,
when regular folks do it, it doesn't really bother me a lot. But here's what does bother me: a lot of prominent people, not just premiers, but everybody running for council, everyone running for dog catcher, wants to pretend they're a cowboy. There's nothing that looks phonier. In the case of most of them, very very few of them look good in the cowboy gear. If everyone knows it's phony, why do they keep on doing it?
Because nobody has the courage to say what you just said out loud. It's because it's easier to go along with the flow than rock the boat. I mean, if you're Justin Trudeau, you're already hated enough. Do you really need to add to that by telling people that they're all a bunch of phonies? If you're Jagmeet Singh, like same thing. Do you really want to get yelled at by a bunch of people? Just put the gear on and suffer through it. And if you're Pierre Poilievre, I don't think you have the courage to say that, maybe he likes it. Who knows? Although, you notice the photos from him this year, you could actually see the creases on his shirt where the shirt came out of the box or the wrapping. So it's not like it was one of his old favorites. I don't get too worked up about the cosplay because I think things like Comic-Con, where people dress up like Star Wars characters, and like that's great. If it makes you feel good and have fun and get a kick out of it, fill your boots. And so the same thing with Stampede. If people get a rise out of dressing up in their cowboy best and partying, like, great. I mean, you're not hurting anybody, so have as much fun as you can. The phoniness is off-putting, but as someone who lives in Calgary, it is nice to have all of the federal party leaders out here, or as many of them as possible, because we don't get that very often. So that part is nice. And I will say, in fairness to Stampede, when I came here in 2010, there was a lot of parts of the culture that were really bad, really sexist, really race. There was like the Indian village, which was like, you would have people come and like dress up in indigenous sort of clothing, and it was like very bad. It was in very poor taste, and they've cleaned a lot of that up. They've cleaned a lot of the sort of toxic elements of it up. There's still a bit of a party culture, but there's also a party culture around sports teams. So I don't think that's unique to this, and they do a lot of good things in terms of fundraising and all the rest of it. So I don't dislike the Stampede. I wish the politicians would just be themselves, and still come here and talk to people. I think that's the good part. But in the grand scheme of things, if that's what they feel like they have to do, there are bigger problems than them wearing cowboy clothes. And I will say that one of the funny things living here over the last few years has been watching conservatives just go crazy over the fact that Trudeau looks the most authentic. Like, he actually looks good in his clothes.
Well, Trudeau, why can't we just say what we have to say? Trudeau is like right out of Hollywood casting. If Trudeau wanted to be an actor, he could. And competing with a guy who obviously looks like a rock star, obviously looks like a movie star, why bother trying to compete?
Well, and and the funny thing is, so Poilievre this time around, the first couple times, the first time as leader, he really looked like he just bought his clothes like 5 minutes before he went on stage. And this time, like, he had like a black t-shirt and a black hat, and he had some aviators, and people were like, "Oh, what's he trying to do?" And I thought, he looks good. Like, he looks kind of cool. He's not Trudeau level, but guy looks good. He's having a good time. Like, who cares? Why does there have to be this big fashion critique of the leaders and this sort of litmus testing of who's most authentic? None of them are authentic. None of them are cowboys. Newsflash, they're all nerds. They're all politicians. Let's just, get on with our days.
Max, with all due respect, as we like to say in Canada, to all of the communities that I've lived in Canada and all the communities that live in the States, there is no part of the world that is more interesting to me, and I know I'm not the only one, for politics than Alberta. But you're an Albertan. You're an Albertan now. I've been in Alberta 3 different times, but you have been there now for the past decade. You're the guest. I need to ask you, if politics wasn't interesting in Alberta, would you be there? And why is it that Alberta is the most interesting place for politics for Max Fawcett?
Oh, God, no. I would never be here if it wasn't the way it is. When I moved here, that was one of my big sort of trepidations, was it's so boring politically. It's only ever elected conservatives in my lifetime. Provincially, it basically only elects conservatives federally. I'm used to living in places where it's a toss-up, where it's interesting. And then, of course, everything changed. We had the NDP winning. We had, the UCP coming along and splintering and Danielle Smith. And it's just been one sort of thing after another. And I apologize. That's my son upstairs. He's cranky. He got up from his nap early. And so, what is interesting to me is this is the front lines of the biggest conversation in our country right now, which is the energy transition. How fast is it going to come? What impact is it going to have on our country? And how do we manage it most effectively? And where else would I rather be than at the very, very front line of the most interesting conversation in the country? When you're talking about it from Ottawa, talking about it from Toronto, it's not the same thing. The choices that are made here are going to define a lot of things about our prosperity over the next 10 to 20 years. And so, it's not going to get any less interesting in the years to come. It really, really is just going to get more and more complicated and fraught and interesting. And I can't, not just because of the housing market, but I really can't see myself going anywhere else anytime soon.
So why is it that Alberta has the most interesting political characters? As you say, they're generally all conservative, but even the conservatives are eating their own all of the time. I've lost track of the amount of conservatives that have been thrown out by the various conservative parties simply, in the last 15 years. What is it about Alberta? What is it about the environment there that creates the characters? And more important, what is it about the public that they tolerate people as premiers? They tolerate people in political leadership, the kind of folks that they wouldn't want to work for in real life. The characters, just a euphemism for what they are.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of conundrum where the conservative politicians out here talk endlessly about sort of the virtues of the public and the people and the voters and their base, and they really kind of make this great character out of them, and then almost inevitably that character drives them from office or causes them no end of heartache and headache, and I think there's this kind of perpetual dissatisfaction in some respects here. A lot of it really is a creature of basically the last 10 years where oil prices have suddenly kind of fallen on their head, and people feel uncertain about the future and they want someone to blame. Part of it is, conservatives keep bringing back people from Ottawa and thinking that they understand how Alberta works. And, we saw this with Jim Prentice, the late Jim Prentice, bless his heart, wonderful man, but didn't really have a great sense of the pulse of Alberta because, he had only ever really run federally, and running federally in Alberta, especially in Calgary, is one of the easiest things to do on earth. You could nominate a ham sandwich and it would probably win. And so they didn't really have the full sense of how hard it was to govern the entire province. Jason Kenney obviously ran into that with COVID. He learned very quickly that what rural Alberta wants and what urban Alberta wants are very different things. They're hard to reconcile. And he sort of painted himself into a particularly deep corner because he portrayed himself as this rural man of the people when, as you and I both know, he's one of the most erudite, sophisticated, cosmopolitan people that's ever been in Canadian politics. I mean, the man, say what you will about his politics, but he is a Laurentian elite to his core. He likes the finer things in life. He likes to listen to classical music. This is not a man of the people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he pretended to be something he wasn't, and that came very quickly home to roost for him. And I think Danielle Smith, in some respects, is going to encounter a similar challenge where she has sold one part of the province a very specific bill of goods and has to kind of reconcile that with the reality of governing places like Calgary and Edmonton, where that bill of goods does not fly.
It's interesting. Jason Kenney and I, as you know, were not just friends, we were close friends for a number of years before we had the fallout, not during this past campaign, of course, because he wasn't running, but the previous campaign. I don't want to rehash all of that. People can read all about it if they want. Just Google Adler Kenney and you'll find out. But in the days when we were friends, we'd go to restaurants. And I remember one night we're in a Japanese restaurant, and I'm eating my sushi with a fork. And Kenney at the time was the immigration minister and multiculturalism minister. And he says to me, Chuck, don't you know that you're with the multiculturalism minister tonight? I said, yeah. I said, I know what you do for a living, and I know what I do for a living. And it's a free country, and I'm eating with my traditional Western silverware. What is your problem? And Jason says to me, excuse me, I should say, Mr. Kenney says, but we're friends. Jason says, I'm personally offended. I just said, blow it out your blowhole, man. I don't care if you're offended. I'm in a free country. I know how to eat with chopsticks if I want to, and maybe if I were with the Prime Minister of Japan or something, and certainly if I were in Japan, I'd eat with a chop. But I mean, whatever. And it just blew my mind that this guy, fast forward a couple of years later, and he's wearing the jeans and the shit kickers and driving around. In other words, he's doing all the kinds of things that he wouldn't be caught dead doing when he was a federal minister, thinking that he was on the fast track to being prime minister. And I had the same reaction that I sometimes have to politicians doing the stampede. I think, oh my God, people in Calgary know that, and people in Edmonton know, people in Alberta know that you're not a rural guy. They know that you're, as you say, Max, Laurentian elite, kind of an Eastern bastard. Why are you doing this? By the way, I guess he did the right things for himself politically because he wedded the two parties, basically eliminated the PCs. It just became one big wild rose party, and he did win the election. But do you honestly think that he had to do all of those things, the blue truck and the shit kickers, and he also started developing a twang, which I'm not saying it personally offended me, but it really did turn me off. He doesn't speak with a twang. We're going to get her done. We're going to get her done. He's doing that stuff. Kind of like a really bad country disc jockey. All of a sudden wants to pretend that he's from Oklahoma, even though he's from Lloydminster. So I just need to ask you this. In light of just looking at all of this in the rearview mirror, do you think Jason Kenney would have been unelectable had he not been just as phony as a $2 bill?
I mean, hindsight is 2020 and all that, and you never know how things would unfold in a different scenario. But I think to me, I think it's pretty clear that he probably could have won with just the PC banner, with him leading the PCs. It obviously would have been much closer. Maybe the NDP would have been able to split the right again, although I really don't think so after the 4 years in government that they had. But let's say he had won with either a minority that was supported by the Wild Rose or sort of a small majority. Imagine how much easier it would have been to deal with COVID from his perspective.
Well, that's where I'm coming. Sorry, that's where I'm coming from, Max. I think that if he had not done if he had not wrapped himself in plastic, he wouldn't have created this bizarre expectation of people in rural Alberta that he was one of them. Get her done. Sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead.
He would have had the ability to govern the way I think in his heart he probably wanted to, which was still to sort of lean towards more freedom, more choice, all that stuff, which is sort of traditional bedrock conservatism, but also listen to scientists, listen to experts, and when things needed to be done, to do them. And yeah, I think it would have been much easier to govern without that rural part in his caucus. And I think Danielle Smith is going to learn the exact same lesson at some point, that you live by the rural caucus, you die by the rural caucus, and it just really, to me, it's a question of how long it takes before that happens. And there's a lesson in that for Pierre Poilievre, I think. He's sort of doing the same thing at the federal level. It's not a rural caucus, but it's it's the PPC part of his coalition that he's constantly bending over backwards to keep in the fold. And I remain unconvinced that it's worth the sacrifices that he's making in parts of the GTA, parts of Greater Vancouver, where the things he's saying and doing are really off-putting to the kind of voters that he needs to win. And again, maybe his path would look a little different, but I think it would be a little more comfortable for him because, again, he is pretending to be something he's not. He is not actually this sort of far right, Bitcoin loving, hates government, all that stuff. Like, he's a guy who is pretty progressive on immigration. He's progressive on, like I said, LGBTQ rights, but he can't say any of those things because it'll upset the voters he needs to keep in his fold. So I think authenticity is always a good policy for politicians, and I don't understand why that's not more obvious, especially to conservatives, because you look at Donald Trump, and what was the lesson there? The lesson above all to me was, other than be a billionaire and lie, cheat, and steal, which perhaps are not the lessons, but be your authentic self. And the thing you can say about Donald Trump, among anything else, is he was always honest about what he actually thought and said. He did not pretend to be a moderate. He did not pretend to be anything that he wasn't. He was like, here I am. If you like me, great. If you don't, you're my enemy. And people responded to it. They liked that candor because it was so unusual in politics, where everyone is pretending to varying degrees to be something they're not. And, I think there's a positive lesson in his terrible negative example for all politicians, but especially conservatives. And it's just one they don't seem to want to learn here.
Max, generally in these podcasts, I like to deliver on the promise that I make to the audience, and that's to ask the odd uncomfortable questions. So I always preface it so that you know that this is coming at you, and you can choose to do it or not to do it. Except if you don't answer, then you'll make me look like a liar, because I always tell the audience we only book guests who are okay with answering uncomfortable questions. So here it is for you. Why do you think that your writing became a lot better, and why did you become a lot ballsier in social media and conversations like this after your dad passed?
That is a good question. I mean, I on some level feel like I have a responsibility to uphold some of his values, and his sort of spiritual characteristics. I mean, my dad was always the kind of person who didn't really mind mixing it up with people, sometimes to his detriment, but you're cut from the cloth that you're cut from. And he was always very clear that you should always tell people the truth, even if they don't like it. Again, sometimes to his detriment. So I think I do feel like I have a responsibility to carry that forward, with my son and with my work. And yeah, it's me, not to get all kind of airy fairy or anything, but maybe, some of him is suddenly now sort of in me and my work and my presence in these things. It was funny when he was alive. I remember trying to explain Twitter to him because he didn't understand it. He was like, "Why are you wasting all your time on this?" And I sort of said to him, "Look, not to be rude, but if you were like 20 years younger, you would be all over Twitter because you get a chance to yell at strangers all day long. Like it's everything you've ever dreamed of. You get to pick fights with people on any subject you want and they'll engage." And he used to love doing that. So, I kind of feel like that's an area where, I'm kind of, like I said, carrying his spirit with me, and, that in fantasy baseball, which is a whole other cup of tea. But, yeah, I mean, I think that's one explanation for it. The other one is, the timing of his passing kind of overlapped with the birth of my son. And, one of the things you discover as a parent, as everyone with kids understands, is that you don't have as much free time. You have to be kind of ruthless with the time that you do have as a writer or any job that you have. And so I think it just sort of clarified my sense of purpose and my sense of time management. Now, again, I still spend far too much time on Twitter for my own good, but I try to be smarter about it, and I try to be a little more deliberate about it than I used to.
Do you tweet when you're on your exercise bike?
That's a trick question because I'm never on my exercise bike. But when I used to be on it, I was doing Peloton, and you have the instructors yelling at you on it, so it's hard to kind of multitask. But look, if there's a place that I can do one thing and then do Twitter at the same time, I'm usually doing it. Which again, you try to be careful about it, but it's it's an addiction, and I'm not shy about acknowledging that like absolutely, like a lot of people, like a lot of quote unquote power users, as they call us, a little bit addicted to all the dopamine hits it gives you, and I'm actively in my life trying to find sort of more organic substitutes for that. Not just because Elon seems determined to blow the entire thing up, but because I can recognize that it is not the world's healthiest way to live.
Max, I'm really sorry that I never had the pleasure of meeting your dad and having a beer with him, or a cup of coffee or a steak or anything. But I'm very, very confident, based on everything that I've read in your many writings about him, that you've got some of the best of you in him. And even better news, I'm confident that your son has some of the best of your dad. What's your take, just based on what you see in your son's personality right now? Does he remind you of your pa at all?
Well, I mean, I'd say the willfulness, but it comes from all four sides of his family tree. They're all willful, so I'm not sure my dad gets full credit for that. We'll see when we start exposing him to baseball more. If that takes naturally, then that's a good sign that my dad's rattling around in there somewhere. But it's funny with kids. The older they get, the more their unique personality starts to show through. And so, I see parts of me in him. I see parts of my wife in him, and I see parts of my dad in him. But honestly, the bigger connection for me is it reminds me of my own childhood. Being around him and getting to do all the things that I do with him as a dad kind of puts me back in the mindset of being a kid again. And so it sort of brings my dad back to life in a weird way. He's sort of always present whenever I'm doing something with him, which is really nice. Of all the good things about having a kid, and look, I was very skeptical about having children right up until the moment it happened. But one of the very good things is it's this constant sort of access point to memories that I have of my dad. And, it's a blessing. So,
Max, thank you so much for rattling around with us here on the podcast. And we've got to do this again. Thank you so much, and good luck to you in everything you do at the National Observer, and of course your own podcast, and of course with your wife and son, the son you never thought you'd have. But I have no doubt that of all the things that you're proud of, including your relationship with your father and your relationship with the media and your relationship with Twitter, I have zero doubt that the relationship you're most proud of is one that you have with your child.
Yeah, it is 100%. And look, just like he's the son I never thought I'd have, I kind of feel like you're the uncle I never thought I'd have. So, I'm glad to be on your show here. I think it's a wonderful success, like I said, and to hell with the haters. You'll keep proving them wrong.
I'm damn proud to be Max Fawcett's Uncle Chuck. Thank you so much. That's the podcast you can subscribe to. You do subscribe in many cases, but you may just be surfing. Please subscribe. You can do it on any of the platforms that you're used to. Tell your friends and neighbors. And the promise is that you will have podcasts with certain questions that are a little uncomfortable, questions about aspects of life, aspects of politics, aspects of culture that are a little bit different. But most important, you'll get guests like Max Fawcett, who are not just intelligent, not just have a great sense of humor, not just have great empathy, but have the capacity to tell a story and to answer uncomfortable questions honestly. They don't just say, well, that's a good question, Chuck, and then they move on. No, they answer the question whether they like it or not. I love having you here. I want to thank everyone who has made us number one in several categories of podcasting. I'm not going to list them all here because it'll seem like bragging. I know that some people who are friends of mine in the States say, Chuck, it's not bragging if you can do it. I just want to thank everyone who has helped us. We've only been on for a week. Hard to believe that people would give us this kind of status in the podcast ecosystem after just 1 week, but I can't thank you enough. My name is Charles Adler. That's the truth. Some of the truth is uncomfortable, but it's still the truth. Thank you very much.
Catch Charles Adler Mondays on Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson, twice a week in the Winnipeg Free Press, and every day at criermedia.co.